Betterment was built to answer the question, what is the best way to invest my money? Betterment customers believe technology can help improve their daily lives. Do you use Uber, Netflix, or Amazon? Betterment customers are just like you. And they're probably just like me, although I'm a little bit older than maybe the actual target audience. I wish I was younger. I wish that both Uber, Netflix, and Amazon had been around when I was in college and just starting out saving money. I wish that Betterment had been around when I was just out of college and starting to save money, or not save money, as the case may be. Money was scary to me. There's probably some deep psychological reasons why, and maybe we'll do an episode about it. But I didn't even like looking at my balance. I was just scared to know how much money I had. I literally would I knew when I was out of money when my ATM card was declined. That's not a good way to go about spending. It's definitely not a good way to go about saving. I wish that I had Betterment. They make investing straightforward. You create an account, you tell them your financial situation, and their advice platform builds a personalized portfolio for your goals and desired level of risk. So I could have done that and then just forgotten about it. I mean, I probably would have helped me get over my fear of checking my balance, but I also could have just set it and forget it, as they say. Now, for each goal, retirement, house down payment, etc., you determine how aggressive or conservative you want to be. And based on this information, Betterment will take care of the underlying investments and implement tax saving strategies. Oh, and don't even get me started on taxes when I was younger. Yeah. Don't be a freelancer, kids. Or actually, if you're a freelancer, do what I do now, which is actually I just save 30% of everything that I get. So helpful tip, that's not from Betterment, that is from me. Betterment has tools and calculators that give you an idea of what your investment strategy could look like, probably more precise than 30% of freelance income. There is always risk in investing, however. With Betterment, they help you avoid the emotion and sales tactics that often plague the financial industry. Investing involves risk. With friends like these, listeners can get 1 month managed free, though. That's not much risk. For more information, visit betterment.com/friends. Again, that's betterment.com/friends. Betterment. Investing made better. Hi, I'm Anna Marie Cox, and welcome to With Friends Like These, a show about difficult conversations and differences between people. This week's show is going to tackle some big issues, some of the biggest, in fact, including God. That's in the second part of the show. I'm going to talk to Liz Bruenig, who's a writer and essayist and editor at the Washington Post, who writes about Christianity and politics, and we're going to tackle an issue that no one has been asking us to talk about, but it's been on my mind a lot lately, especially really lately, which is the problem of prayer. How do you keep doing it when the world seems to not be responding to it? And very specifically, the entity you're talking to doesn't seem to be responding to it. Prayer by its nature is a somewhat lonely endeavor, I think. And so it was helpful to talk to Liz, making it a little less lonely. And that's the big issue in the second part. In the first part of the show, I talked to Bob Inglis, who's a former South Carolina congressman and former climate change denier, who is now the head of RepublicEN.org, which is a conservative climate change advocacy organization. He is all about finding conservative and market-based solutions to climate change. He believes in climate change. As someone who was from the reddest part of the reddest state, which is South Carolina, who was someone who said if Al Gore was for it, he was against it. That was his primary way of thinking about climate change. He had a really interesting evolution, which you can read about in a few different interviews. It's been a while now for him. I actually wanted to talk to him more about what's going on in his life now, which is that he is an activist among conservatives for climate change. And he's constantly having the kinds of conversations that we talk about on the show. He is having conversations with people who diametrically oppose what it is he would like them to get on board with. And I think that he has some great, real life, real practical tips for those of us that want to engage, especially on this issue. And he is the first guest coming right up. Welcome to the show, Bob Inglis, former congressman and executive director of, am I pronouncing it right, RepublicEN.org?
Yes,
Okay.
Yes, good to be with you, Anna. Yeah, we call it republicen.org so that people can find it on Google. Google wants to change the spelling to Republican, but we're different. We even spell it differently, so it's republicen.org.
Republic-en, as in Republican and energy together, which is what your cause is, essentially. Conservative approaches to solving climate change, right?
That's right.
So I have a couple of things right off the bat. Like we know each other. I know your story. It's an amazing kind of journey that you had about being from the reddest part of the reddest state, South Carolina, being an incredible critic of Al Gore, and then over time, partially because of your children, coming to embrace the idea that climate change is real. And now that is what you do with some urgency, is try to get other conservatives on board for this. Am I summarizing an incredible, glossing over a lot of things? Is that a correct summation?
Yeah, that's the way it is. And, really it's what it is. It's the best idea I came across while I was in Congress. And it was a metamorphosis for me because, at first I was a disputer of the climate science. I didn't know anything about it except that Al Gore was for it. But then after that metamorphosis you've just described, I looked into it and came across this solution that is really a pretty exciting solution that fits with what conservatives deeply believe, but it also fits with progressives like Al Gore. So ultimately, I believe we can bring America together and lead the world to a solution on climate change.
And I want to encourage people to look into the specifics of the policy solution you're talking about, which has to do with a carbon tax offset by tax cuts elsewhere. Again, grossly simplifying, but there's some other stuff I want to get to. So they can go to the website and find out more about that.
Yes.
And it is
republicen.org.
And it is a very market-based solution, but it is the headline I think for a lot of our listeners is that you came to believe in climate change. So you actually deal with it not necessarily in a familiar way, but maybe what you can share some experience, strength, and hope from is the fact that you do talk to conservative politicians a lot who aren't necessarily climate change realists, and you do some evangelism around that. What does that approach involve?
Well, oddly, I would here congratulate Kellyanne Conway for something that she does rather well, unfortunately, but uses it to bad effect. And that is, she listens to the question and then picks out a word and then runs with that word in a completely different direction. Now, that's the diabolical part of Kellyanne Conway. The part that I would say that actually is good is to listen to the question and then try to find some point of agreement, because this is not just, it's a little bit deeper than what I'm about to say, but what I'm thinking about here is a standard thing that's taught in public speaking classes, is go look at the Mark Antony speech, and how I'm not here to praise Caesar, I'm here to bury him. And Brutus is an honorable man. And then he says that over and over and over. And by the time you get to the end of it, you know that Brutus is a traitor and a beast. And so Kellyanne Conway knows how to listen to Mark Antony's speech, too, and figure out how to turn that around. But what we need to do, in not in the kingdom of darkness there, but in the kingdom of light, is try to listen carefully and then find some commonality to talk with them about. And so if you hear their concern about climate change, for example, let's take climate change. I think that what you're going to hear is an awful lot of guilt and some fear and a sense of hopelessness. Mm. And that concoction leads to denial. Mm. And so we need to unpack that a little bit. And when you hear that, give people the grace of saying, well, we just didn't know, did we? We didn't know that burning all these fossil fuels was going to cause all this trouble. Now, maybe we should have known, but we didn't know. But now we know. And so now we can do something about it, and then go into how, there really are things we can do about it. Then you increase the sense of efficacy. People are then working with you, and they're not feeling like you're shaming them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I got all kinds of theories, as you can tell, on about how to approach people on that subject.
Well, I mean, I want to hear almost all of them, because seriously, this is basically the point of the show in many ways. It's one of the points of the show is to try and figure out how to talk to people and one of the tenets that I have, and I've shared this with you in the past, is that you have to go into it without the idea that I am going to convince this person, right? Like, it has to be an approach of humility. Even if you know you're right, even if you feel with all your heart that climate change is real and people who deny it are idiots, or you have to change your thinking a little bit, actually. I would say that if you go into a conversation with any kind of sense of people who deny it are idiots, you're probably not going to have much success, right? Like, because people can tell when you think that. But you can believe that climate change is real, and you can know that in your bones and believe the science. But you still have to approach a conversation with someone who's a skeptic or denier with some humility about the need or the desire to change their mind. Like, it has to be sort of offered up with an open hand to them, rather than as especially current reference in our politics today, a fist. Like, it has to be an open-handed, like, here is something that I believe. What do you think of it? I mean, I think that if you go into something trying to convince people, they can tell. They feel condescended to.
Yeah, well, and I must confess, I'm not too good at part of that. I mean, the part that I can sometimes pull off is the humility, and I'm not always. The part that I'm really not very good at is the open-handed nature of what you described, because I'm a lawyer, commercial real estate lawyer, but I want to convince people, and so I'm not real good at part of what you're describing there. But if you can balance that with enough humility, just to try to help them, even if you want to convince them, which I typically do, and of course that's my day job now at republican.org, is to try to convince conservatives, is that, so I guess I'm well cast as a lawyer making the case, but if you go into it at least with trying to understand what their concern is, and here's the concern. I mean, if we take climate change specifically, the concern that a lot of conservatives have is that they've heard about a big government that's going to come and solve this problem with regulations or with a very complex trading scheme. And they think this is like inspired by the UN, and it's got the Wall Street traders in it on cap and trade. You got the government bureaucrats telling us what to do through regulations and the Clean Power Plan, and it's got the godless scientist telling us we got a problem. Well, there's nothing in that paragraph that's attractive to conservatives. And it's actually pretty fearful. I mean, all those things are like, wait, I don't want any of that. And so it just engenders a rejection, a sort of a regurgitation, just a reflex of regurgitation. And so what we do at republican.org is try to unpack that and first identify with them, maybe a little bit like I'm talking about with Mark Antony in the speech about burying Caesar, is to say, you're right. What's happened so many times is that the liberals gin up controversy and tell us about these woeful bad cases, and then they jam through some regulations and some tax increases. They take away liberty. They grow the size of the nanny state. No wonder we're not interested in acting on climate. And so, but now that we've got that point of agreement that we don't want that either, could we consider the possibility that there's a small government answer? That really all it is accountability. All it is putting all the cost in on all the fuels and making them available to a transparent marketplace so that we see the full health and climate cost at the meter at our power meter and at the gas pump, if you do that, then in the liberty of enlightened self-interest, we will change and we will seek out products that don't have those costs associated with them. And entrepreneurs will create those products and sell them to us. They'll make money, create jobs, will create wealth, will expand the economy. And so isn't it exciting to be a climate realist and an energy optimist? And so at that point, it's a completely different, okay, we can deal with this then, can't we? We're not acquiescing to the left and feeling guilty about all this. We're charging forward as very excited capitalists out to solve a problem and, by the way, make a lot of money while we're doing it.
I have to say it saddens me a little bit that the appeal that you use, which does sound very effective, has some of its attractiveness is based in, reifying the divide between left and right. By going ahead and agreeing that on our shared enemy, the liberals. Yeah.
Yeah. It is a problem because and really. Here I am at the outset. I said that we believe there's a way to bring America together, that progressives and conservatives actually agree. And then we go and we name our outfit republicen.org.
Right.
Well, that's confirming the partisan divide, isn't it? I mean, and so we admit to that. But there's a method to the madness, and here's what it is. We think that in addition to this concern about the growth of government, there's another psychoanalysis that we do of ourselves as conservatives, and that is that we think we have an inferiority complex when it comes to energy and climate. We conservatives just think we're no good when it comes to energy and climate. We don't have an answer. And so when the topic comes up, you bring it up, let's say, I shrink in science denial because I don't want to talk about that because I don't think I'm equipped to talk about it. And so what we think we've got to do is go to conservatives and say, and basically buck them up.
And build up their confidence. The poor fragile white male conservatives. Oh, so sad.
Yeah, you're really good. You've got the answer here. You know the answer. The answer is a level playing field where fuels compete honestly. And the only role for government is being the honest cop on the beat that says, okay, ladies and gentlemen, all cost in, all subsidies out. Now compete. And we'll watch you and make sure you're revealing all your cost. And we'll take away all the subsidies. And now compete fairly. And so that's once conservatives start feeling like they can enter the competition of ideas, then they can stop shrinking in science denial. An example is, if you talk to me about this silly marathon you want me to run in, well, I don't want to run 26 miles. So every time you bring it up, I'm going to change the subject to, well, why don't we go swimming a little bit or maybe a little bike ride? But I don't want to enter that competition with you about a marathon because I don't want to go that far. Mm-hmm. And so that's what we do. We confess or admit that it is driving the partisan divide a little bit, but it's with the hope that once empowered, conservatives can send leaders down to the river to meet with the other tribes' leaders. The reason that conservative leaders don't leave the tents of the conservative tribe to go down to the river is if they stepped out from underneath that tent, they get stabbed in the back, first of all, by people inside the tent, because people inside the tent are so frightened that they don't have an answer to the question that they think their leader is going to sell them out down at the river. So we go into the tent, we say, listen, our tribe's really good. Give it a war whoop. We're really good. Free enterprise can solve climate change. Now, send them down to the river. Once they get down there, they're going to find Al Gore at the river. And Al's going to say, well, of course, that's a great answer. That's what I've been for about 30 years.
I want to drill down a little bit on your metaphor because I want to make sure I understand it, which is the idea of this marathon. We have a lot of Greek themes going on here, I think. Like there's tents and Mark Antony, Romans too, I guess. So the marathon is climate change, and you go to a Republican who's let's just say a typical male white conservative member of Congress, not probably in shape to run a marathon, let's say, knows he's not in shape to run this climate change marathon. So when you talk about it, he's like, no, thanks. Even if you're saying we want to be on a team with you, he's like, no marathon, no. And so what you say is like, no, we're going to be on a team together against the liberals to run this marathon. And it's not so hard. I think you can do it. You can do it. We can do it together. Like, we're going to run this marathon, and I believe that you have the strength to do this marathon.
Well, the only thing that's different than what you just said is we don't necessarily say against the liberals. We think the race is against climate change itself. And so in that, but we do in the naming of republican.org, in the talking about how, there have been big government solutions only offered, and we've got to show this different solution. But what we want to make the race is against climate change, because we think once we get running that race, we'll realize Al Gore is running right beside us. I mean, and actually he's got the same answer, which is tax carbon dioxide, untax income, or dividend the money back, apply the tax on imports so that it makes it in our trading partners' interest to get in on the same thing. We have then a worldwide pricing of carbon dioxide into products, which creates an incentive for entrepreneurs to fill the desire of consumers to lower their cost by buying the better, cleaner, cheaper fuels of the future. And so at that point, if we can then feel confident about ourselves, then we can say, okay, we can extend a hand to Al Gore, and let's shake hands on this deal and get it done. But when you don't feel good about your position, you can't extend the hand because you think that you're inadequate somehow.
You know, it's funny. I think this psychoanalysis, it hits home. To me, it sounds like it hits the target. It's confirmed a suspicion that progressives have had. And I was about to talk about that suspicion that progressives have had about, the fragility of conservatives around certain issues. But it's also true probably that progressives have some issues that they feel ill-equipped to talk about and therefore react badly in talking about solutions. I would say gun control might be one of them.
Yeah.
Like you say gun control to a liberal progressive person, and they know they don't know much about guns, and perhaps react without, even though I am for common sense gun control myself, but I am also a gun owner and think that guns are not terrible. So I sort of feel like I can have that conversation perhaps better than some other, progressives who simply have more knee-jerk reactions, right? Like, we want to avoid knee-jerk reactions. We want to speak to some place we're informed about. And the knee-jerk reactions come when we aren't informed. They come from when we're insecure and we aren't sure about what a more nuanced solution is, maybe.
Right. And when we can conjure up a boogeyman on the scene that's really nefariously back there trying to destroy us. So, for example, another example that I would use about progressive inadequacy and frankly, just wrong position is on genetically modified organisms.
Oh, yeah.
And it's the reason I think that progressives, I would guess, I'm not a progressive, but I don't know that tribe all that well, but if I could from afar diagnose them, what I would say is that they see Monsanto and other terrible corporate villains trying to, in their labs, come up with terrible things that are going to destroy the earth, or unleash things that they don't understand that end up destroying the earth. And so because that boogeyman's on the scene and they don't trust corporations and they don't trust their labs, they think it's all bad. But when you stop and think about it, there are people in Africa dependent on cassava. That plant is being destroyed by a fungus. It is possible to genetically modify cassava so that it can resist that fungus. Why, in the name of heaven, would we not say, absolutely, somebody figure out how to fix the cassava plant and save people from starvation? Now, of course, we do need to be careful that we don't unleash something in the environment that's dangerous. But on the other hand, the modifications to cassava could be really helpful to humankind. But because there maybe progressives like conservatives on climate change don't feel that they are comfortable with the people that are moving, because conservatives on climate change have seen, the UN, the Wall Street traders, the government bureaucrats. That's who's been the moving parties, and the godless scientists.
Can't forget the godless scientists.
GMOs on the left, what they're concerned about is they see Monsanto and other evil corporations acting in their financial interest, and they don't trust them. And so it does boil down to trust.
You're listening to With Friends Like These with Anna Marie Cox.
So I do a fair amount of travel for business, and I have had some bad experiences. This is like the bad experience ad roll episode of With Friends Like These. Not too long ago, actually, I booked a place without paying enough attention, and it turned out to be less than ideal. And I was kind of stranded in this strange city at a place that, there weren't any active deals of any kind being made in the hallways, but I was suspicious about it. And I wish that I had used Upside because they specialize in business travel. They specialize in booking things, travel, like hotels and flights together. And it's, targeted at business travelers. And I guess I have trouble remembering that that's what I am. I am doing this for work. Also, you save money not just on, bundling your hotel and flight, but you also get a free Amazon gift card worth hundreds of dollars every time you use Upside. Now, like I said, they bundle flights and hotels together. They save you money, and you still get to keep your miles, which is actually the reason why sometimes I still book my own travel, even when other people say that they'd happily do it for me. I want the miles because I'm a miles pig. That's a weird thing that happens when you get older. You start to really care about airline miles. Right now, if you use the code FRIENDS, you are guaranteed a $100 Amazon gift card for your first time using the service. Again, that's Upside Travel. They book everything for you, but you get to keep the miles. You get to be the one in charge. But it's the ease and convenience of dealing with a business travel agency. Again, my code FRIENDS will get you a $100 Amazon gift card and you'll save on the other stuff that you're booking every time. Upside.com, my offer code is FRIENDS. There is a minimum purchase required. See the site for complete details. I have this strange feeling that, in a way, both sides have rational fears, it is true that government can run amok and be oppressive, right? It is true that the state can get too entrenched in policy and be too micromanaged too much, right? It is also true that corporations can behave incredibly badly and create things that are beyond their control. So both sides have a rational set of fears. And in fact, what I always think about when I think about the reasons why it's worth it to try and understand an ideological opposite's point of view is that I know myself really well. And I know that in any given policy situation, my instinct is going to be to trust the government and not trust the corporations, right? That's just, you describe a policy to me and I'm going to kind of gravitate to the one that is imbued with more trust in government and less trust in corporations. But I also recognize I may not always be right. My fear may not always be the one that's the most grounded. So I want to be able to talk to someone who sees the world differently, who sees the opposite, and whose skepticism is about government and not corporations. Because maybe that's the solution that's the actual better solution. But I'm not seeing it because I know that my primary fear is about corporations rather than government.
Yeah, I think that's what you've just described is should be the thing that we do. I think if you do that, you're better than I am, because most often I don't want to know what the other side thinks. To tell you the honest truth, and so it is because it's a threat to my confidence. If I'm hearing, for example, But take that GMO example. If I think about it, yes, I can see how corporations have in fact been villains at times. I mean,
Bob,
real villains. And so when that it comes to mind, I get worried about how solid my position is, and so I start sort of hedging. Anyway, but the best thing to do is what you just described: is be open to hearing that. Yeah, let's balance this, and of course that's the reality. The big divide in our country, seems to me, is between people who believe in meritocracies, who believe in individual effort and reward. Those are generally called conservatives or Republicans. And then people who generally believe in community and fairness. And those people are generally called progressives and Democrats. And so the truth is America wants and needs both of those impulses and both of those personality types in order to make good decisions. It's sort of like we wish for every child two parents, one who says, Johnny, we love you no matter what, and the other who says, Johnny, we need you to do better in math. You really need both of those influences on Johnny's life. Johnny, you're wonderful. We love you. That's maybe the communitarian, egalitarian, progressive Democrat. And then you need the meritocracy-driven conservative to say, Johnny, get your grades up in math, buddy.
Yes. I mean, what we need are people that are, everyone has blind spots, right? Like, that's the way I see it too. Like, maybe we have one parent that sees that sees the sympathetic reading of Johnny's explanation for why he was late home from school. And we have one parent who's skeptical about Johnny's reasons why he's late home from school. But the truth is somewhere between there, right? And in some cases, the problem, of course, is that an ideal situation requires both sides to be listening to each other. And we are not in that space right now. Although I do have a hope that I really hate, people know this, I hate the term silver lining. I'm just going to say, but the opportunity in this era, this Trump era, that conservatives and liberals are talking to each other because we have a shared enemy, Like, you are a dyed-in-the-wool conservative. You are a conservative in many ways, but you're no Trump fan. Like, I think conservatives and liberals are talking to each other these days because of Trump.
Right, because I think there's a new, there are a couple of unifying possibilities. One is there's a new contender on the political stage, a third that's different than the two I just described. I was just describing communitarian egalitarians, those are progressives, and hierarchical individualists, those are conservatives. That's Dan Kahan at Yale's terminology I'm using there. But add to that a third force that's on the scene now, and it's populist nationalism
and authoritarianism.
I think both conservatives and progressives recognize it as a very dangerous force. That when you have populist nationalism going on, where you've got what's clearly populist, in other words, just trying to pick up on whatever passions are out there and fan them up into a real flame, and then you combine it with this sort of sense of pretty extreme nationalism, that fear of other people and shutting ourselves off and building walls and keeping people out, and trying to get to the pure. That's really dangerous for both conservatives and progressives.
Mm-hmm. Obviously, I agree, but I'm also curious, though. So one of the things that I'm hopeful about this opportunity we have in talking to each other about our shared foe, but sometimes I wonder, what are the possibilities for our partnership across an ideological line? Absent this foe, like if we want to grow this relationship, does this moment lead to a continued conversation? And I have a specific question for you that I think relates to that, which is that, so you became, a climate change activist after being a skeptic denier. And I wonder, was that the end of a journey for you, or have you found yourself continuing? I don't want to say moving left. I don't want to characterize it as an ideological shift, but I think belief is a web, and if you pull on one string, a lot of other things get pulled with it. And so I just wonder if you have seen in yourself other kinds of changes in outlook that have come with being a more open-minded person, maybe in general.
Well, yeah, I think so. So for example, when it comes to things like respecting gay folks and just saying, we're gonna respect love and let it bloom. That comes from some of that metamorphosis too, I suppose. I've also seen it though in the other way around, which is I was just on the phone yesterday with a supporter who is a liberal Democrat by all of his financial giving to contributions to campaigns. And so he's talking about how what we need in this country is more investment, because investment is going to make this happen in climate change. And he's going on and on about how we've got to untax capital and we've got to get more investment going. And I stopped and said, you sound like a conservative. And he said, well, yes, actually, in the 2 years I've been working on this very intensely, I've become much more conservative in my views about how to deal with the economy. And so it's because he looked into something, in the case of climate change. I mean, I think climate change is a great case study of what you're talking about, because there's a real opportunity. In answer to your question about whether this moment can continue once the common foe leaves, which is populist nationalism, which I believe is going to burn out. Once people realize that you can't build anything with pitchforks and torches, which have now gone all the way into the Oval Office, and all you've got is just fire in there, they will turn back to conservatives and progressives and say, now, you people who have ideas about how to build, can you please help us? And so the perfect way for conservatives and progressives to work together on something is in climate change, because my friend who just was, after 2 years of intense work on this, has moved considerably to the right in terms of his views about how to spur the investment in these new clean energies. And somebody like me, who some would perceive as having moved left to be concerned about climate change, are actually just moving toward a commonly held solution that fits for the values of both tribes.
And I think that it's important. What you described, I think, is a really important insight, which is that this idea that belief is a web, and if you pull one strand, other strands get pulled too, has to work in both directions. I think if we want to have the opportunity to change someone else's mind, we need to be open to ourselves to changing our mind. Maybe not on that issue, but in being open to. We have to have the same kind of openness in accepting other points of view and allowing that there may be another solution, because if you don't have that in any part of your life, I just think you're going to have a really hard time getting people to listen to you.
Yeah, I mean, where I think somebody that's displaying this right now, and this is going to sound strange maybe coming from a conservative, but I think that President Obama has done a good job of trying to say that about his healthcare package. Is if you can improve it, I'm happy to hear it. And so that's been a good teachable moment of his openness to saying, okay, listen, surely it can be improved. Show us how, and then let's do it. And I hope in his post-presidency that he can continue to model that, because I think that would be very helpful to the Republic.
I'm looking forward to leadership from him in the post-presidency as well. But I think it's a tough row for him in a way. Like he's such a we'd have a whole other separate conversation about how what we see in the Oval Office right now is a reaction to him, and that I'm sure is what is staying his hand a little bit in being active right now. But we are out of time. I could talk to you a lot more. I want to have you back and talk more about the idea of evangelism more generally and how that informs climate change. Because I think what you're doing is evangelism, and that is actually what we're all doing when we try to share our beliefs with someone else. Like it is a form of evangelism. You're trying to spread the good news.
Yeah.
And just to go back to again, like I feel like it's so much more successful when you do it with an open hand, and not at the point of not the end of a pointing finger. And it sounds like that is what you have discovered too.
Yeah, that's exciting. That's a rich topic to explore there.
All right. Well, we'll have you back. Thanks again for joining me, Bob Inglis. Republic. I think you got in the name of the organization a lot, but I'll say it again. Republic-EN.
Republic-EN.org. Yes. Well, it's wonderful to be with you, Anna. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bob.
You're listening to With Friends Like These with Anna Marie Cox.
So the thing about giving out the show's email address when I do the credits at the end, I'll give it out now too. It's withfriendslikePod@gmail.com, is that you get some unsolicited resumes, quite a few of them, in fact. If I was going to do hiring, though, I think I would rather use ZipRecruiter. I mean, I just have a taste from giving you my email address just now. I have a taste of what it must be like if you just put your job out there for the world to respond to. ZipRecruiter is better. For one thing, it gets it out to job sites with just one click, hundreds of job sites. And their powerful technology efficiently manages the right people to the job. Better than anyone else. And you don't have to go through all the resumes. They will pick the resumes, the best people out for you. Unlike other job sites, ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you, it finds them. In fact, over 80% of the jobs posted on ZipRecruiter get a qualified candidate in just 24 hours. No juggling emails or calls to your office. Simply screen, rate, and manage all in one place. Like that would also be really helpful too if I was hiring to be able to rate the candidates in some easy fashion rather than having a Gmail account filled with attachments. ZipRecruiter's easy-to-use dashboard is just that. Now find out today why ZipRecruiter has been used by businesses of all sizes to find the most qualified job candidates with immediate results. Right now, my listeners can post jobs to ZipRecruiter for free. That is right, for free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/friends. Again, that's ZipRecruiter.com/friends. One more time. ZipRecruiter.com/friends. Welcome to the show, Elizabeth Stoker Brunig. She is a writer and editor at the Washington Post. She writes often about Christianity and politics, and that is why I have asked you here today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on.
You wrote a piece not too long ago about a series of really, I don't know, how do you want to describe the series of things that happened to you?
The period where my husband lost his job and we were having a baby, and there were a bunch of just sort of like stressful but ordinary life events. And then my husband's sister was murdered.
Yeah.
Yeah, that happened last summer, about a year ago now. It was very, very difficult.
Yeah.
And it was a period where I was doing a lot of praying. And I sort of was frustrated by it because, prayer is communication, and you expect a response in kind. You're asking sometimes for things, for help, for strength. And up until that point, I'd never had anything that bad happen to me before, at least not all at once, and not, in a position where I felt so overwhelmed. And so I didn't really know what to do. I didn't really know how to pray about it, how I should feel about it. And it was a period where, I started to feel like maybe God was listening and just didn't want to respond. And that was really hard.
Did you have prayer as part of your life prior to that?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I pray every day.
Yeah.
And I've always, been religious since I was a kid. So I've always prayed. But, when you're in periods like that, where there are sort of inexplicable, really bad things going on, that are hard to integrate into your life and into your story about yourself and other people, the way that you pray, I think, has to change. And it's hard to figure out how that should work on your own, I think.
Did you figure out a way for it to change?
So I started relying much more heavily on my church. I always thought, hey, in the Catholic Church especially, we have all kinds of sort of set prayers that are there for you. And so it's not difficult to know how you're supposed to pray. You just say the Our Father or the Hail Mary or something like that. And, there are all kinds of prayers that saints have put down over the years and so on and so forth. And, you can always refer yourself to those, but I just felt like nothing was, quote unquote, working, and didn't know what I was doing wrong. And I spent a lot of time in confession, actually, and found that really helped. And I think that the most helpful takeaway I got at that time from the priest from my confessor was that, faith can be really painful. And prayer is part of faith, right? You don't pray in the absence of faith generally. You pray because you think you're being heard, or you want to be heard, and you have some hope that you'll be heard. And sometimes that can actually add to the pain, because you know that it's possible that God could just fix everything, or could solve it. It could make you feel better, or make other people respond better. But that's not what happens necessarily. And so you're praying and you're looking for help, and actually it can be adding to the difficulty, adding to the suffering, and it can tear at you. And that was something that I had to realize, that this suffering, the pain, part of it was that faith can be difficult, that it can be a challenge, that it can be trying. And I think at that point, you look at stories of martyrs and saints and realize, we don't have it that bad in our lives generally. But that their experiences do have something to say to the ordinary person, that you don't have to be martyred to have an experience of faith that is, adjacent to that. And that was helpful for me to realize.
So I have a couple of different thoughts. One is that so personally, I started praying because I was told to. And I actually did pray without faith. I mean, without conscious faith, I would say. I was told as part of my recovery, like that's part of it. Like you got to pray. It's like one of the pieces of instruction you get. It's mandatory. And I said to my counselor at the time that I did not believe really, and she said, "I don't care. That's belief. Belief is optional." And I was like, "Well, then what's the point?" And she said, "Well, you can pray for faith if you want, but also this is just about acknowledging that you can't fix things on your own. Like this is just an out loud, acknowledgement that you're not the one in complete control. Like any prayer, even a foxhole prayer, a thoughts and prayers prayer, any prayer, if you're prayer for a parking place, every single prayer, whether it's said with real, quote unquote, real belief or not, is an acknowledgement that I am not the most powerful thing in the universe, that there's something more greater than me out there."
Right.
A prayer is an exercise in humility. All prayers are an exercise in humility. So my experience was kind of backwards, right? Like, so I was told to pray, so I prayed. And I gave myself the reasoning. I'd read somewhere that, addiction is all about patterns in the brain, like worn down patterns in the brain, like almost literally, neural pathways. And that part of getting better is that you have to create new ones. And so I kind of told myself, well, prayer is helping me create new neural pathways. I have a scientific reason to be praying. But I also prayed for faith because I was like, it would be great to believe this is working. It would be great to be saying these prayers and to believe that it made a difference. And the strange thing is, and perhaps, a cynical even more science-based person than myself would say that I just fooled myself into it. I just, some kind of self-hypnosis. But I kind of prayed my way into faith. Not because my prayers were answered exactly. Because one of the things that I was instructed to do with my prayers was I couldn't pray for any personal gain. So that kind of took a lot off the table. But, well, one of the things that happened is that, and this is not going to make a difference to many, many people out there, but I did stay sober. And so I was like, well, at least something's working, right? Prayer is working on some level. And that's a miracle. So I'll keep doing it. And I've just been able to, grow my faith from there. But the role that prayer has played has been that I do it and I don't expect an answer and I don't expect to feel like I'm being heard. Those rare occasions when I feel it they're incredibly rare. I would say like there's been 2 times in my life where I felt like someone was listening. And that might have just been like, I think Dickens talks about Ebenezer Scrooge thinking the ghost might be a little bit of underdone potato, perhaps. And sometimes I wonder if my feeling of the presence of God was just an upset stomach. But that's made my prayer practice something that has been incredibly helpful to me, though, in times that are truly terrible. And I wonder, so your experience having to go through this series of really tough events and having your sense of not being listened to feel so painful, what did that do to your faith moving forward when things aren't so bad?
Well, for one, thank you for sharing that with me. I think it's very, very interesting. And coming at it from a perspective of addiction and recovery is very different than, sort of a typical pastoral situation. And so that's really fascinating. And I'm very heartened by the idea, by the way, that you can pray yourself into faith. I think that's good news for a lot of people. And it might be very helpful outside of an addiction and recovery setting, as a matter of fact, and maybe is more frequent of occurrence than I give it credit for. But sort of going forward, I sort of changed my expectations somewhat as to what an answered prayer is like. And in a very simple way, and that is that, when someone in your life is hurting, when they're in a lot of pain, oftentimes there's nothing you can do about it. You think about a friend going through a divorce or losing a child or a family member or something like that. There's nothing you can do. The only thing you can do is say that I'm here and I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. And, for anybody who's ever been in a situation like that and had those sorts of words of comfort from friends or family members, they help. Because at least you're not alone. And with prayer, I think that's oftentimes one of the most exceptional takeaways, is the comfort and the peace you have just knowing that you're being heard, that you're not alone. You have to trust that God is merciful and that God is loving. He doesn't like what people go through when they're going through periods like that. Those are things that human beings inflict on one another. God doesn't desire that. And sometimes it's just as much as accepting that comfort, accepting that God wishes it weren't so, and that's not what He intended, and that He's listening. And that can be, that can be enough. It doesn't have to be a magic wand, solving everything. It can be as much as, I'm so sorry. And I do think that is, the closest I've ever felt to understanding what the church is getting at with, the message of Christ's mercy. Mm. It can be as subtle as that. As I'm so sorry, and I wish it weren't that way, and I didn't intend that for you. Then that can be enough. And I think that a more mature faith has to integrate that fact that sometimes that's all there is. And it's not nothing. The sympathy of the creator of the universe is quite something.
Yeah. I think of it also, it's not just sympathy, right? It's love. what I get out of prayer. I recognize that it's sort of on me to feel heard. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
I can't expect that. I think in some ways our great religions do a disservice when we hear stories of, angels visiting and incredible feeling of peace pouring over me. And, they kind of build it up a lot, right?
Yeah.
And, really that peace actually comes from my faith. It comes from me believing. It doesn't come from an action being performed upon me. Like, that love is there for me to accept. Whether or not I choose to accept it is on me. So I can have the peace of that love and understanding if I believe that it's there.
Yeah.
Because it's only on the most rare occasions is it going to be that God, overtly taps you on the shoulder and lets you know.
Yeah.
Here, I have some miracles for you. Would you like today? Other than that, it's just it's what we're swimming in, and it's the water we swim in, and we can choose to acknowledge it or not, but it's there.
I think that's right as well, and I think there's so much of faith relies on the communities of people that we have, and I think it's really easy to underrate how important other people are in sort of like establishing and shoring up and keeping faith alive, but especially in really difficult times. It's so important to have a community of faithful people around you, and they don't have to be the exact same denomination or practice in the exact same way, but people who are also believers in some respect, who are willing to be with you. I think that's very important. It was important for me because in isolation it can be very easy to feel like your faith is slipping or that there's no reason to keep on this way. But part of what's great about a community of faith believers is you can see that God has touched other people's lives. Mm-hmm. And so even though it's difficult in the moment or it's difficult for the foreseeable future, the fact that God has touched other people and that God has helped other people, sometimes do similar things, directly or indirectly, only through their faith or through some kind of intervention, that was really helpful for me. And I talked to a lot of my friends about things I hadn't talked to them about before during that time. Friends who've had problems with infertility, who can't start their families, and friends who have had serious pain in their lives that we hadn't discussed because it's hard and weird. We talked about it then. And we talked about it in the context of prayer and in the context of waiting for help that seemed like it was never going to come. And that meant a lot to me.
And I think that that's also that community of believers, even if it's not exact same belief, and even if it's not belief, even called belief in a way, is what the power of the thoughts and prayers cliche is that it is powerful to know that someone is thinking about you.
Yeah.
To be recognized and to have your pain be recognized by another human being is a powerful and healing thing. I mean, I have lots of friends who are not believers.
Oh yeah, so do I.
Yeah, and that's whatever. We all respect each other, and I find myself when they're going through hard times. Something I say to people who I know are fellow believers is, "I'll keep you in my prayers." What I say often to my friends who are not believers is, "You're in my thoughts," which is the exact same fucking thing. It is. It's just I am holding you in my thoughts. I am feeling warmth towards you.
Yeah. I think so. I have a lot of friends who are not believers, and I still tell them I'm praying for them, and I've found that there's a lot of gratitude for that, because I think there's a recognition that even if they think it's quote unquote not working, nonetheless that it's someone thinking about you and being there for you and acknowledging what you're going through, and that still means a lot. I've never had any friends who don't believe give me a hard time about that or respond with anything but total sincerity and gratitude.
Yeah. I mean, I don't expect people to react badly. I just sort of feel like I don't I want them to know that that is the thing that I'm doing for them.
Yeah.
You know, that
I think that's exactly right.
I am holding you in my thoughts, which sometimes can be a little more, I think that sometimes people who aren't believers hear that, you know.
Yeah.
You're listening to With Friends Like These with Anna Marie Cox.
Basically, all the ads that I'm reading today make me feel old because they are all solutions to problems that existed for people 10, 15 years ago. And we didn't know how they would be solved. One of those problems is standing in line for tickets, which is a thing, children, that people used to do. I think you think of it now more as for getting a new phone or sneakers, but that people used to do that for concerts, believe it or not. Like go to a venue. I have done it. Go to a venue and people would literally camp out for tickets. Now, maybe you've heard like your older brothers and sisters or grandparents talk about that, but you don't have to do that anymore. SeatGeek is probably the best way around that. They have a seamless mobile experience. You can buy and sell tickets in 2 taps. It is a better, simpler way. No sleeping bags involved. They help you find the best seats at the best prices. I've actually used it. They have a really intuitive way of looking at a stadium and picking out the best seats. They're priced accordingly. You can kind of decide ahead of time, like how much do I really, really want to see Coldplay? As people have heard in the past, I don't particularly want to see them, but I'm getting tickets anyway because my husband, who I think is just barely old enough to remember camping out for tickets, is a huge Coldplay fan. There is nothing quite like seeing your favorite team or musician in person, and SeatGeek will get you closer to the action for a great value. Now, like I said, I have SeatGeek app on my phone, and it is really, really easy. I do find their ratings and pricing system to be the most helpful part of it. But it is designed from the ground up to make your ticket buying experience easier than ever. It saves time and money by searching multiple ticket sites to compare prices and find amazing deals. And to get the most bang for your buck, SeatGeek grades every ticket based on value. That's what I was talking about before. They put it probably better. They grade every ticket based on value to help you immediately find the best seats that fit your budget. Plus, every purchase is fully guaranteed, so you can shop for tickets on SeatGeek with confidence. Make SeatGeek your go-to app for finding the best deals on every type of ticket, from sports to concerts to comedy to theater. And best of all, my listeners get $20 off their first SeatGeek purchase. Just download the SeatGeek app and enter promo code FRIENDS. Again, that's promo code FRIENDS, and you will get $20 off your first SeatGeek purchase. I actually want to transition a little bit to this idea of sustaining prayer, of the community of believers, prayer, how it changes us. I pray for, and we mentioned praying for other people. I'm going to put a controversial statement out there, which is also true. I pray for Donald Trump. I was taught, when I was taught to pray, that I had to pray for people that I resent, and I had to pray for people that I wanted to hate, and I had to pray for my enemies. And I guess I'm just going to go ahead and say, like, I guess, Trump considers me the enemy. So, I don't really consider him my enemy, but he is, I would say I do resent him. And people ask me what form that takes. And it's weird. Like I have this maybe almost superstitious kind of feeling about it because I don't want to pray for him to get what he wants, like that seems like it might not be good for other people. I often pray that he have a successful presidency, that our country grow and prosper and heal underneath his administration. I mean, it sounds like you also are familiar with and maybe even try to put into practice the idea of praying for, those you're on your bad side.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's a mortification thing on one level. Praying for people whom you resent or your own enemies changes you. And, when you have to come up with something good to say at any point, but especially in the context of speaking directly to God about people you don't like, it forces you in some ways to humanize them and to think about the implications of your bad relationship with them. So if I found myself unable to pray for Trump to have a successful presidency, it would, cause me to reflect on the fact that my resentment of Trump or my investment in politics is causing me to, put the interests of my countrymen and fellow citizens second. And that, there should be some due reflection on that if that is the case. The night that Trump won, I was very surprised. I think probably everybody was. And I had a little baby at the time. My daughter was like 6 months or so. And I thought, wow, that's crazy. Donald Trump. I mean, I was especially worried about foreign policy. All these thoughts went through my head, and I thought, he doesn't really have any diplomatic experience. How is he going to get along with other countries, And I did pray for him, and I didn't pray for him to get what he wants or for him to have the agenda that he has set before him pan out. But I prayed for God's will to be done. Mm-hmm. And, assuming that God only wills the good for us, which is what I believe, I prayed that God would, work through him to do his own will, and that Trump would be receptive to that. And I think that is the best thing you can hope for anyone, is that God is able to work through them to do the good for them that he wants to do. And that's what I hope for Trump. And who knows what form that takes? Only God knows. You can speculate that it means maybe reining in some impulses or something like that. But whatever must be done for God to work through him to do good, I hope that happens. And I hope it happens with me and with everyone else. But yeah, I do try to, and there are like much more petty and ridiculous personal squabbles where I also pray for people I don't like, mm-hmm. With less high stakes than the future of the country. And I do try to make a point to do that, not only because it's what Jesus asked us to do, but because it can really help solve those conflicts. It can help resolve some of those really negative feelings. And then, that can make it easier to deal with people. Not always, but sometimes. So that's always my hope.
I think in terms of Trump and other kinds of like big ask prayers, although, the big asks can also be about relatively, small things.
Sure.
But future of the country bullshit. I think that the prayer that I have sort of settled on, which is about, that the country prosper and grow and heal in his presidency. Number one, I sometimes feel like I'm being like a little passive aggressive when I say that, because I'm kind of like, and that could mean a lot of different things for Trump himself, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not actually praying for, like, I'm praying for the country, and I am, kind of being maybe like, that could mean he gets impeached if, that could be the form that this prayer takes, really. But having to pray that, the way that it changes me is something you touched on too, which is that it forces me to think about what is my real value here. If Trump was to somehow, let's just, the imaginary, future, he endorsed single payer healthcare, and he got, Bannon out of there, and he, reinstituted, he re-ratified the Voting Rights Act, all things that I am for. Would I be able to accept and rejoice in that, right?
Yeah.
Or do I have something invested in Trump being my enemy? Which, at this point, it's almost hard to not feel a little invested in that. For those of us that are appalled by him, if you, on this day-to-day drumbeat of terrible news, there's part of us that gets invested in having that enemy.
Yeah, Matt and my husband and I talked a lot about that when he was elected. And, part of the issue with Trump is it's so hard to predict what he's going to do, and so much of what he's going to do has to do with factors that are sort of random and bizarre, like who he has recently liked or talked to.
Yes.
That, it kind of is up in the air. And we had a conversation where I said, if Trump somehow gets in a situation where he, endorses single-payer, universal health care and actually does rebuild infrastructure and invests a lot of money into job creation, would it be possible for us to say that he had a fairly successful presidency?
Mm-hmm.
And, I of course hold out hope that will be the case. Not because of the feelings I have about Trump, but because of what it would mean for everybody else. And I would have to deal with my private feelings of, well, I still resent this person because of the way it unfolded or because of the impact it had socially, in terms of normalizing certain modes of behavior that I'm not comfortable with and I don't like. But I still would rather him do those things that would put me in that tough position than not do them.
Yeah.
I would rather be in the tough position of having to figure out how to respond favorably to genuinely good policy than the position I'm in now.
Yes. Which is, to be fair, it is this sort of situation where prayer does come naturally.
Oh, yeah.
So we're out of time, but I want to thank you for coming on and being so forthright in your discussion of prayer. It's one of those things that I feel like I'm still getting comfortable talking about, but it's easy to talk about it with you.
Oh, thank you so much. I so appreciate it.
Well, that's it for the show. As usual, I have to thank you for making it this far. I know I sometimes actually kind of turn off a podcast once it finishes up with the main part. So you are hearing the credits, which I give you credit for. If you want to follow Bob Inglis on Twitter, he is at Bob Inglis, which is at BOBINGLIS. Elizabeth Bruenig is at eBruenig. That is at EBRUENIG. You want to follow the show? We're at crooked_friends. And you can also send mail to the show. That email address is withfriendslikepod@gmail.com. Again, that's withfriendslikepod@gmail.com. I do read every email you send. We are working on a system of getting some responses out there, but you are being heard. Especially want to thank those of us who have written in with questions or to describe problems that they've had with how relationships have had an impact on their politics or politics have had an impact on their relationships. We are storing some of those up for an upcoming show where we're going to have listeners call in and get some feedback from an expert-ish guest. At least someone has some idea, know what they're talking about, or maybe just a good perspective. Anyway, stay tuned for that show. We will be back next week with Friends Like These.